Good morning, everyone. I think we are actually live. Can that be so? It's not. Perfect. Everyone can see and hear us, so we'll just have to trust that. Welcome to this first episode of the Demand Exploration Open Seminar. And this is a Demand Exploration community event, but it is open for anyone that's interested. And if you want to know more about Demand Exploration community, I will just send you a link in the chat. My name is Lina Svensberg. I'm working in the Compare Foundation, and I'm trying to hold this community together. And today I'm very happy to present a friend and a colleague and an international thought leader in the area of public procurement and public administration. So welcome, Warren Smith. Please introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lina. And it's great to be here. Really grateful for the opportunity to share my perspectives and my experience. My name is Warren Smith. I'm Director of Insight, Innovation and Impact at Posterity Global. I'm a former UK government senior official, a recovering senior official. And I was responsible for introducing new ways of thinking, new ways of working in support of digital transformation, using procurement as a lever for better public service outcomes, introducing human-centered approaches, more agile approaches, more design-led approaches, and more data-driven approaches in public procurement. And I'm a procurement practitioner myself of 30 years. Good heavens, I can't believe that time already. And I'm going to be talking today about public procurement folklore and the mindset shift in public administration. So just waiting for my slides to appear magically on the screen, and then I will kick off. And I look forward to the questions after the session. So if I could have my slides up there we go. Thank you so much. And I am now going to go through the slides, and I can't see anybody, but I'm assuming that everything is going okay. So yeah, this picture is just a typical day in the office. But no, it actually is. I put into Dali a prompt for public procurement folklore, and I asked it to kind of emphasize the sort of eeriness of some of these things, and that was the picture it came up with. Anyway, so if we think about folklore first, before we get into public procurement folklore, a couple of definitions that I think will be useful framing. So Wikipedia, it describes folklore as the body of expressive culture shared by a particular group of people, culture, or subculture. And this includes oral traditions such as tales, myths, legends, proverbs, poems, jokes, and other oral traditions. It's quite a comprehensive definition. The Merriam-Webster dictionary describes it as traditional customs, tales, sayings, dances, or art forms preserved among people. Now, there's probably a bunch of other definitions, but I just wanted to use these as a useful framing. But if we look at the definitions a bit more closely, what I really like about these definitions in relation to public procurement is actually it's really important that we have expressive culture shared by a particular group of people, culture, or subculture. So how do we think about the profession of public procurement as a collective and people who are able to express themselves and their experiences and to talk about it? So this includes oral, and that's really important, and storytelling, so tales, proverbs, poems, and dare I say jokes. I mean, we need public procurement to be a bit more lighthearted, so a bit tongue-in-cheek there. So in terms of the Wikipedia, that's what I like about this definition. In terms of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, what I also like, again, tales, sayings. So we hear a lot of terminology used that's quite specific to public procurement. Dances, maybe not, but I think, again, it's like, let's relax, let's loosen up a bit in public procurement. And art forms, again, more expressive ways of interacting among a people. So fundamentally, it should be about people coming together to share their experiences so that they can learn from each other and move ahead. What I'm less interested about is traditions. Now, I'm not saying that approaches in the past aren't important. They are, but we have to learn from what works and what doesn't and move on. And that's why myths and legends, I think, actually we don't it's not really the place for kind of make believe. We need reality, and we need reality that's informed by the practical reality of what actually works and what doesn't work. And that's why, again, in the Wikipedia definition, traditional customs, I think we need to be informed by what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past, but we need to be looking ahead to the future and preserved. I mean, this sounds like it's being kind of frozen in ice or something, but ultimately we need to make sure that we are always thinking about how we can innovate, learning from experiences and moving ahead. It's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think this is a useful way of thinking about folklore in the context of public procurement folklore. And of course, I'm going to reference Lina's white paper that she co-authored with Shellorken. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. I needed some tuition on that in Brussels when we last met in October last year. But this is an excellent white paper. And within the white paper, among many other observations and analyses, it makes reference to the ISO standard 37106/2018, which is guidance on operating models for sustainable cities and communities. And in here, it describes that there is a perception, there are barriers rooted in legislative framework for procurement. However, it's not primarily the case. Smart outcomes-based procurement can be compatible with fundamental premise of international law. I'm not going to read it all, but I've highlighted here the key points here, right? The key barriers are rooted much more in procurement culture and practice, which can and should be tackled. And so for me, this is the fact that you've got an international standards organization, and this standard itself is developed with the input from domestic standard setting bodies across the world. This is fundamental. And so then Lina's excellent white paper goes on to talk about, and with a little bit of sprinkling from myself, procurement folklore being defined as the informal, often unquestioned narratives within procurement teams that reinforce risk-averse behaviors and maintain the status quo. So that, again, this is like the custom in practice being misinterpreted as the law, when actually it's nothing but kind of stories, oral traditions, let's say, practices that are being handed down from generation to generation of procurement practitioners. And as a result, innovation-driven procurement often frequently encounters resistance, not due to formal legal limitations, but because institutional habits prioritize procedural compliance over strategic outcomes. This is very succinctly put, and I think is an excellent way of describing exactly the application of the definition of folklore into the profession of public procurement. And as the ISO standard says, this can and should be tackled. They talk about this at the city administrations, but this is almost ubiquitous across different levels of public administration. So something I've been calling for, and Posterity Global have been calling for some time, is we need a public procurement renaissance. It's well overdue. We need a rebirth. And it's absolutely time for action. And indeed, because it's overdue, we should just be cracking on. This is another Dali image regarding contracts and renaissance. So just to kind of frame this problem space, if I could, it's a massive market. It's big business. The Open Contracting Partnership and Spend Network published a report a couple of years ago, which is well worth a read. And within that, they estimate that globally, governments spend approximately the equivalent of US dollars 13 trillion each year. I wasn't sure how many zeros that was, but it's a huge number. It's an eye-watering number. The European Union spends about 2 trillion euros each year through public procurement. UK government spends between 3 and 400 billion each year. So big business. But the same report also finds that of that 13 trillion US dollars, less than 3% of that spend is declared publicly. So that is a shocking situation when actually, as a very powerful lever, and I'll come on to that, the actions and activities that take place through the procurement process is largely opaque. So that also needs to fundamentally change. There's an excellent report published by the European Court of Auditors in 2023, which looked across the European Union's public procurement over a period of a decade ending 2021, I think. And they found that 80% of the contracts awarded are actually in favor of the lowest price bids. Well, that doesn't sound like it's representing value if actually the main drive is on lowest price. Lowest price does not equal value for money, and indeed is very unlikely to equal social value. Same report also found that focus is on compliance with the procurement rules rather than on performance. In other words, procurement practitioners are trying to ensure that they award a contract without being taken to court, with little consideration for what actually happens beyond the contract award. Again, if that's the focus, then there's very little consideration for the value for money that is delivered beyond the contract award, the social value that can be realized, the well-being impact, and the public value for communities that the government is there to serve, which all happens once the money starts to flow out the door beyond the contract award. Now, public procurement is not the only problem area. There's an excellent report published in September 2024, collaboratively between the World Commerce and Contracting and Deloitte. This is called The Purpose of Contracts. And this was quite a comprehensive survey. So just looking at the demographics there, included over 370 organizations. Just over half was from the buy side and just under half was from the supply side. 80% of respondents have been working with contracts for at least 10 years. And we can see the regions globally that are covered by respondents here. So just a quick scan, I think Europe represents 35%, North America 29%, and the others are evident from the chart there. But this report finds that generally contracting across any sector is actually declining in effectiveness. So legal and contracting practitioners have a very low regard for contracts. Only less than 40% felt that contracts support successful business outcomes, and only 16% believe that today's negotiations focus on the right topics. This was actually a repeat report compared to one that was undertaken in 2017. And we can see here that actually the position since the last report is declining further. So the big question, as it says here, do contracts fail to meet their intended purpose? 27% in 2017, 40% in 2024. So we're seeing this kind of erosion of either confidence and practice. So the report goes on to actually talking about the room for improvements. It identified 5 areas that respondents felt needed the most improvement: clarity and simplicity. We know that procurement tends to be very complex, burdensome, inflexible, and not at all adaptable, slow and cumbersome and bureaucratic and not really efficient. Largely manual. We have some digital tools, but these are a bit clunky. And also communication and collaboration tends to be the exception rather than the norm. This comes back to the folklore definitions that actually people need to be talking both internally and externally, really vital. The report also finds that, or recommends rather, that leadership and the professionals themselves, representing both legal and contracting, they really need to lean into this. And I love this sort of summary of the improvements. Adapt how they approach contracting and be prepared to leave behind their incorrigible legacy approach. Again, back to preserving the traditions of the past. We need to move away from those, and we need to think about how we reimagine future possibilities through public contracting. They need to lead from the top, embracing these new ways of contracting to drive a change in mindset. Oh, that word again. And to take the opportunity to lead and reinvent the practice of contracting. We need a renaissance. We need a rebirth, a complete systems reboot of the profession to focus on a different set of driving purposes and values and principles. Some of you on the call may have been a part of or be aware of the UN Summit of the Future, which was held in September at the UN General Assembly in New York last year, at which the Pact for the Future was ratified by world leaders and heads of state. And this includes a couple of key annexes: the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations. I would recommend this as a priority read for anybody interested in reforming public administrations, with a particular focus on balancing short, medium, and long-term value through procurement. There's just a few snippets from this report. It talks about today's decisions, actions, and inactions have positive and negative multiplier effects spanning generations. So when we think about procurement-related decisions, and actually that starts way upstream in terms of budgeting, investment cases, the way that we think about prioritizing procurement activity, right the way through to contract management and exit, all of those decisions can have a positive and multiplier effect spanning generations. But what do I mean by that? Well, so I was talking to somebody in Wales this week about the Welsh government's ambition to be waste zero by 2050. So that's 25 years' time. But when we think about, well, who's likely to have an impact positive on the amount of waste that goes into the recycling system? Well, yes, the adults of today, but actually school leavers, youth, children, the adults of the future, whose behaviors and social actions will have an effect on the ability for increasing circularity and reducing the amount of waste that goes into the waste management system. So we need to be thinking about a different set of stakeholders and participants when we're thinking about designing procurements and contracts that have a long-term impact. Same applies for infrastructure projects like transportation, as well as other public services. And so for me, this Pact for the Future was a kind of a mid-decade reboot of the Sustainable Development Agenda, which provides us with a kind of almost a permission to reimagine the art of the possible in our professions to support the Sustainable Development Agenda. And so, yeah, global transformation is a chance for renewal and progress grounded in our common humanity. Amen to that. So I talk a lot about a paradigm and mindset shift, and Lina and I talk a lot about this together, and actually it's a real rapid meeting of minds on this. But so what do we mean by a paradigm and mindset shift? Well, there's a bunch of characteristics. I'm not going to go into these into too much detail. We're happy to share all the slides afterwards. But basically, we need to move away from these kind of traditions of the past, not be wedded to those. We have to be moving towards a new future state. So spending public money sounds far too transactional, like we're just trying to get money out the door. This has to be about an investment mindset where public money actually delivers social returns on that investment. We need to move away from that compliance to avoid legal challenges. Legal compliance is important, but not at the expense of public value. We have to be thinking about the art of the possible in public procurement, and indeed any allied functions that work closely with procurement: finance, legal, audit and risk, digital, HR. Public procurement folklore, the subject of today. So not folklore, the bad bits, those are for the birds. The good bits, absolutely. Law as an enabler of public value. So moving away from this being the department of no, computer says no, procurement says no. Actually, procurement says yes, and here's how we'll help. E-government in Industry 4.0, so moving away from a kind of like a 20th century paradigm and a focus on technology, more to a 21st century paradigm and a focus on human-centered approaches to technology as also enablers for better public service and Industry 5.0. Buy versus build, this kind of false dichotomy, almost in competition with each other. The use of the word versus sounds like it's one or the other. Actually, we need to be taking a much more blended approach in decision making in public procurement. A reuse and consume, I would say, first approach, whereby we look at reusable open source assets and how to and what to buy and what to build as a holistic totality. Myopic focus on lowest price, so very blinkered. Absolutely need to move away from that to balance short, medium, and long-term value. And also changing the relationships that we have both internally and externally, moving away from kind of arm's length relationships that are quite adversarial. We often hear things in procurement, think, it just gets chucked over the fence to procurement. It's like, why is there a fence? Work together, be part of the same team. Much more collaboration, much more cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams that reduce those barriers to inclusive collaboration. false certainty. We hear this so often in public procurement that this notion that through contracts you can actually lock down certainty. It's nonsense. We need to anticipate change, and we need to embrace experimentation through the procurement and contracting process. And I know Lina is doing some excellent work in this, and hopefully we can get onto that through the Q&A. Opening up markets rather than being closed and opaque, largely vertical, so kind of prime, subprime supply chains, thinking about a much more ecosystem approach, which is more transparent and diverse. Outsourcing seems to be a near kind of default in public procurement, but we need to understand like what's right to have in-house, what's right to bring in external expertise for, and where might there be a blended alternative that sits at the kind of intersection between those. Software, I've mentioned this already, kind of open source, but there's an increasing number of digital public goods and infrastructure that are available for us to reuse. We should be looking at those. And also, opening up the market to encourage greater participation of, including diverse ownership and control structures, and simplifying contracts. So that kind of brings me back to, we need a public procurement renaissance, a rebirth and reboot of the profession. Let's make it happen. So thank you very much. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join you today. Happy to take questions in whatever form may come, but please do keep in touch, and so we will reach out, and I look forward to taking this further. But thank you back to you, Lina.
Thanks a lot, Warren, for a brilliant presentation, and thanks for joining us. Of course, I see that there are some questions coming in to chat, and keep them coming. I think you see in the stream where you put this as comments, and where we can pick them up from here. I have a first question for you. I mean, you're from the UK, they're based in France right now, and we see how, I would say that the UK is kind of moving their positions forward in this field, and you have this new Procurement Act that came into play just a couple of weeks ago. How would you interpret that? Is that a step in the right direction? I mean, should the rest of us countries look at the UK, or how do you see that? And now you are muted, I think. I cannot hear you.
Sorry. Yes, I muted myself. So I'll try to steer clear of any kind of political contentious comments. But since the UK left the European Union, we're no longer bound by EU directives. We have the new Procurement Act 2023. And by and large, I would say, and I know some fellow travelers would say, that actually what this provides is, again, a bit like the Pact for the Future, the US Pact for the Future. It's a permissive reboot of the art of the possible, because we have, through the Procurement Act, a number of the procedures that are available through the EU directives have actually been consolidated into a singular procedure called the Competitive Flexible Procedure. And that basically incorporates what you can do under the Innovation Partnership Procedure, Competitive Dialogue, Negotiated Procedure. So they're all in one, right? But basically, rather than being constrained to say, right, well, if I choose the Innovation Partnership Procedure, that is the track in which I am obligated to follow. I, as a contracting authority, can design my procedure to say, I'm going to take the best bits of all of those different procedures. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and something certainly the European Commission's revisiting of the EU directives. Perhaps that's something I want to consider is potentially applicable and possible within the European Union. But like I say, the flexibility is largely there, was for the UK authorities, and having that firsthand from both barristers and legal professionals in the UK. But what that requires is people to lean in and to kind of change their mindset around this, and really understanding, like, well, what is the purpose of what we're trying to do, what the outcomes and impact we're trying to achieve, and really kind of working backwards from there to design an approach and a procedure that is going to optimize delivering the most advantageous tender. That's another change. So we don't have most economically advantageous tender anymore. the most advantageous tender that balances economic, environmental, social, and cultural value for the communities that government's there to serve.
That's brilliant. Thanks a lot. We have a question in the chat from Jakob Lindvall, dear colleague of mine and from yours as well, who thanks you for an excellent presentation, of course. And then he has a comment that is a part of procurement folklore revolves around eliminating risk. Innovation, on the other hand, is the journey into unknown territory where risk is an inherent part of the process. How do you think we can change the public procurement folklore narrative around risk? Or rather, how foster confidence and reliability in the procurement process while still managing risk effectively?
That's a great question. Apologies for the noise. I think somebody was emptying their recycling just as you were saying that. So, yeah. So I think risk can't be eliminated. It can be identified and managed and mitigated through actions based on who's best placed to deal with that, right? So, and I think the notion that through public procurement we can eliminate it, I think has to be challenged. I think that's about kind of risk-based approaches actually is a sensible way to understand you can and perhaps can't do. But that's why I think like the experimental approach is so vital, because that actually requires us to embrace and lean into the risk, and trying to also take ways which reduces the risk through, for example, targeted investments in rapidly increasing our understanding of what works and what doesn't work in potentially new and novel areas, so that we can harvest that learning very quickly to a follow-on stage, again using very targeted and relatively small investment to take that learning insight forward to the next level. That, for me, that is actually a very good definition of value for money, because instead of this kind of notion of false certainty and absolving yourself of risk, which typically involves large amounts of money, long-term delivery, and headlines in the newspapers when things go wrong, right? We can avoid those kind of things by taking this risk-based approach. But that does require a rethink of investment flows, team dynamics, ways of working, and how that flows into procurement contracting. So, yeah, I think, again, it's a different mindset and approach and set of methods, practices that embraces risk. And it's about, measured risk taking and sharing the insights and the learnings that come from those experiments. So vital. And this is like why in my definition of folklore is we need to be talking and we need to be sharing this, and those learnings should define how we move forward, not the things of the past. Yeah,
that's great. I have another question for you, Warren. I mean, since we know each other well, and I also know that you have. I mean, sometimes we hang around in the corridors in Brussels and Geneva, and we write papers, and you're also connected to the World Economic Forum. But as a difference between you and many other policymakers is that you have a long background as a practitioner in procurement. Can you tell us a couple of words about your background and what you have done? And then my second question is, do you see that which kind of advantages does it bring to you to have that kind of solid background in practice that maybe isn't always present in the corridors in Geneva?
Yeah. Thanks, Lina. Good question. So, my 30-year journey started, in fact, let's say, so like 1995 was when I came out of university. My degree was in anthropology. Nothing to do with procurement, so I say. However, when we talk about folklore and meaning and symbolism, and actually it's really useful. But that time of me joining that profession was like in the early days of the internet, right? And over that space of the last 30 years, we've seen amazing and also some kind of questionable things happen, developments and innovations as a result of what the internet has enabled. But the profession has kind of like, it's like a sort of like a glacial line of progress, I would say. And I'm saying that as a practitioner, okay? I'm not for throwing stones. So everything that I've been trying to do over the last 15, 20 years is to close the gap between the ways of working, the mindset and the culture and the working practices of digital enabled by internet era and commercial and procurement. And and that was certainly something that I had my best opportunity when I joined the UK government back in 2012, and because the invitation was, come help fix government procurement in support of the digital transformation strategy and agenda at that time. So that's why when I talk about user-centered design, agile delivery, or open and collaborative approaches and data-driven approaches, these are the bread and butter of digital practitioners, but it was the complete antithesis of the procurement practitioners. And so we had to spend a lot of time investing in bringing people together, getting people on the same page, respecting the different perspectives from, and this included lawyers, bringing that, assembling that multidisciplinary cross-functional team. And that was so vital. And I would suggest any practitioner, or if you're not a procurement practitioner, if you're a digital lead within your organization and you're perhaps frustrated by a lack of progress in procurement, then come together, establish that shared respect and understanding, and try to move things forward from that point of view. And so, yeah, I think, and when we talk about public procurement, it is a complex system. It's sometimes it seems too large to tackle, but I think where we spoke about this in Brussels. No, where do you start in transforming complex systems? I would say anywhere, because all of the interactions between different things, they're inevitably connected in some shape or form. So choose the thin slice in that system, which probably is one of the most painful for users, primary users being the sort of buyer and the supplier, and see what you can do there, and then work out from there. So I think it's we're not trying to boil the ocean. It's important to think big about the problems to solve, but start small, get people together, experiment, and share those the learnings from that through increasing communities of practice across government, and that helps to scale the reforms as well.
Brilliant. I see that you just answered Jacob Lindvall's next question. I don't know if you saw it, even, because he asked, how do one practitioners drive this change? Where should we start? Where do we place the acupuncture needle, so to say? So
I love that, and I love the analogy of like the sort of the body analogy, and perhaps alternative forms of medicine or treatment. Yeah. Again, it's like so. Just to give an example, in the UK, I as it was in the early days of me joining the GDS, the Government Digital Service. And all around me, I was seeing excellent work happening by designers, user researchers, product managers, technical architects, applying interaction designers, applying their craft collectively and collaboratively to outdated government websites and services, back-end systems. And I was thinking, well, why isn't anybody applying this into procurement and contracting? And it just seemed like perhaps nobody had considered it. I don't know. But when at the same time, you had the market saying your contracts are complex, they create barriers to SMEs. Your onerous contracts are just, we don't read them, and that's like, what? So I said, right, well, let's choose one contract we knew was particularly problematic, and it was a relatively small contract in the great scheme of between 300 and 400 billion being spent each year. This one contract had about, over its 4 to 5 year lifespan, had about 180 million pounds spent to it over that lifespan. So it was a drop in the ocean, really. So I said, can we just experiment with this contract? And well, actually, I didn't ask for permission. I just went ahead and did it. And I brought together senior lawyers, policy practitioners and digital practitioners. We printed the contract, stuck it up on the wall, like however many hundred pages. And over a 3-day period, the lawyers were just like cutting this contract up, ripping it, saying, we don't need that. That's a term not even used in the contract. That's duplicated. Get rid of that. And it was a really cathartic process. And the lawyers had actually been given, I think the first time, scissors, and a safe space to challenge an established product of their profession. And we were able to simplify that contract. I think we reduced it by 50% in terms of size. Content designers were then pair writing clauses with lawyers in plain language. And we were reimagining the way of navigating the contract. So that experiment then led to the policy team in the Crown Commercial Service saying, could we apply this to create this approach to create a new model contract for all common goods and services? And so that model contract then is what's used as the building block for all new framework agreements that they have to create. So this experiment led to a scaled approach, again, enabled through a collaborative multidisciplinary approach that focused on a singular problem to solve. And that was really, really powerful.
Great. Thank you. Great. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. I think we have time to go through those. We have a question from Neshe Tuna, colleague of mine. Also thanks you for a great presentation, and says that you touch a lot on the culture and mindset, and of course marrying the different points of views. And I wonder if you think that there is one solution that fits all, or do you believe that we need to consider both the cultural, both national and organizational, in policy making if we want to achieve this renaissance?
Very good question. I think there's probably one enduring point, which would, for me, span, or rather is irrespective of the level of government in which you operate, and that is to be respectful of context. It's so important that, we don't make a bunch of assumptions at the outset. It's okay to make those assumptions together, but not before you've actually engaged with the teams who are the ones at the coalface dealing with the challenges. And I'm going to use like city administrations very specifically here, because they are at the coalface public service delivery, or cities or municipalities. They are at the front line of providing public service to their citizens, to their businesses, to their social organizations, the provision of health and care services, education, transportation, you name it. All of these public services coalesce in cities and municipalities. So I think it's so important to really work closely, collaboratively, and respectfully with your teams at the coalface to really understand how together can help to deliver this, this cultural change, this mindset shift, and this renaissance in the profession. But it really does require that respectful, humbling, because they can tell their stories of change and indeed their stories of woe back to the importance of being open and honest. And that is, you cannot get that level of insight and by outsourcing at that stage. You need to be working with the line of business commissioners, the problem owners, because they ultimately should be the solution owners to this. So yeah, and also there are a bunch of tools and techniques that can be used here. It's not about, again, not applying one size fits all. It's about adapting and using what is useful and is best placed to meet the needs of the users, whoever they may be in that context.
Great answer. We have a last point here from Carl Thomas, who also thanks you for a great presentation, of course. And he also emphasizes that you make some important points about risk, that it can never be eliminated, but by adopting the right approach, it can be managed effectively and even exploited in the right circumstances to deliver greater value for stakeholders. And key to this is to adopt a proactive approach to risk identification and management and avoid risk dumping down the supply chain, which of course is important. And he also thinks that developing the right culture is crucial for embedding procurement as a key lever to deliver value and achieve strategic corporate objectives. In the words for Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You're like comment on that.
Very good, and great to see Carl on the call. I know Carl very well from our work in the public sector in Wales. No, I mean, Carl, you're absolutely right, and I hope I reflected that point well enough in the presentation. I think this so I should have said also in my introduction that I lead a working group for the UN's International Telecommunications Union called which is focused on intergenerational performance of people-centered cities. And this is particularly relevant, but not exclusively relevant in Wales, because 10 years ago, they legislated for sustainable development and the well-being of generations. And that's such an important point of leadership that we need to be thinking beyond our kind of temporal constraints and our lifespans, actually, and indeed thinking about upstream and downstream activities. And this goes back to like the points I was making in the UN's Pact for the Future, is that the decisions made today can have multiplier effects, positive and negative downstream. And actually, something else also kind of included in that pact is like the future should not simply be an extrapolation of the past.
Yeah.
We really need to be thinking about like what are those future outcomes and impact that we need to achieve, and how do we optimize our actions, decisions today to create that public value, both short, medium, and long term. So I think that applies equally to risk management. We need to be understanding that risk profiles and risk vectors, particularly like cybersecurity and digital, they are changing and adapting at a in real time terms. We need to understand those very intimately. So yeah, I think supply chain risk and risk generally is really fundamental to lean into, embrace, and understand how to manage, mitigate, and exploit.
We have one last question, and that is an anonymous LinkedIn user that asks, how do you perceive the maturity or readiness to change the mind shift among procurement organizations? Can we have a 10-second answer on that before we...
Ooh, okay. I think actually, I think there are some that are ready and some that aren't. I think this is really the role of the C-suite, so to speak. All the chiefs within an organization need to be aligned and work together to ensure that procurement and the art of the possible in public procurement and contract is embraced. And that requires alignment between finance, legal, commercial and procurement, digital, audit and risk. And that's why those chiefs need to create the enabling environments for experimentation, challenging the status quo constructively, and realizing the art of the possible.
Perfect. I think that's a great finishing line or closing line for this show or this seminar. So I just want to thank you very much, Warren, for joining us and sharing your point of view. I think it's a lot of valuable perspectives from many years of experience. And let's just keep this discussion going, keep learning from each other, keep exploring, keep exchanging ideas. You can, of course, follow Warren on LinkedIn and me as well. And you can also join the Demand Exploration community through the link that was sent in the comments of this show. So by that, and talking about breakfast, I think we should just round this meeting up and move on with our days. And thank you very much, all of you, and talk again soon.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you, everybody.